All right. Hey guys, welcome to this episode where we're going to talk about overcoming scrupulosity. And I'm going to, really kind of tie up this series in this episode and the next. Really just with trying to emphasize a very specific points to help you if this is something that you struggle with. So if you don't know, scrupulosity is really when your fear, anxiety gets projected or latched onto God, existential concepts, certain verses, salvation, all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to speak about it today from the perspective of essentially a more Christian oriented perspective, because normally that's what I work with. It's obviously more aligned with what I believe, right? And, what I personally believe, what I personally struggled with. And when I'm talking about certain biblical texts, it's going to be referencing the Bible. Now, if you practice something different than that, and you have a different religious text, because we're talking about scrupulosity and we're talking about fear, then you'll kind of have to see how what I'm talking about fits into your specific belief structure. And because we are talking about an OCD and anxiety concept, and I'm not proclaiming to be an expert, ordained minister or anything like that. I'm simply talking about it from this lens, okay? Because this is what I believe, and it's primarily what I work with when it comes to the clients that I work with who struggle with scrupulosity. So, before we dive in, real quick, if you're looking for help with OCD and anxiety, head over to restoredminds.com. I have tons of resources there for you. You can also look at the links below in the notes. Also, if you benefit from the show, please help us out by liking, subscribing, leaving a nice review on iTunes and Spotify, as it really helps the algorithm and get this to more people. So, the central message of today's episode is really this idea that God is not your source of fear. And this is what I think is one of the central pieces to overcoming scrupulosity, is really identifying the cause or the source of fear. Now, what happens, so let's go ahead and start with just the general premise of this idea. If something is the cause of fear, then that experience would be, experienced worldwide, essentially, right? When you're saying, God is the cause of fear, well, if God, the all present, all powerful, all knowing, entity, being, energy, however you understand God, then the cause of fear would be, or fear would be a natural effect on everyone, right? This was one of my big realizations when it came to me overcoming my own scrupulosity. Was I was looking around and I was doing all these compulsions, going to church all the time, reading the Bible all the time. And I was looking around and I was like, okay, no one else is afraid of this the way I am, right? No one else is worrying all the time about getting possessed or going to hell or, these terrible things happening. And so it's either that I am so evolved in my thinking that I'm the only person that really understands this, or I'm completely misunderstanding this and I am actually the cause of this, right? Because if God was the cause of fear, everyone would feel and just be afraid all the time, right? When it comes to if doorknobs caused anxiety, everyone that touched a doorknob would get anxious. And what I realized is I was the problem. It wasn't God. It was I had a misunderstanding. I had to own that. I had to take responsibility for that. Because as long as I saw it as anything other than me, I was going to try to control and remove or fix that, right? So if I saw God as the source of my conflict, And what I was trying to do is ultimately manipulate God, right, through prayer, through my actions, all this stuff, to get him to do something that I wanted. That's what the compulsions are. So when you're compulsively confessing, doing these religious rituals, just because they're a religious behavior doesn't mean they're, done in the spirit of what they're intended to be in, right? When you're doing something out of the intention of alleviating your own fear, it's not a practice of connecting to the divine, because God's not the source of fear, right? Like when we're talking about God, like how I understand God now, with like a just complete love, like complete love. It's obvious to me now that God's not the cause of fear. It's our own ego, our own sense of separateness, and we are the source of fear. We project our fear onto God, right? Meaning we have fear and then we project God as the cause of it, to not confront it in ourselves. And that's what the root of scrupulosity is, in my opinion. So to shift to a all-knowing, to having a relationship with an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving being, all-present being, and being able to trust and put, that aspect of trust in God, is just a completely different way of living. Most people with scrupulosity, will articulate the things they think they're supposed to say, right? Oh, I completely trust in God, right? Oh, I know God is just, again, all loving, unconditional. I intellectually know this, but bodily and experientially you don't, right? Because your behaviors indicate what you really believe on a certain level. So if you're having to appease and try to, prevent God from doing something, malicious to you, like sending you to hell, or it's like you believe in that type of God because you behave, right? Yeah, and you might hold contradictory knowledge in your mind, but emotionally you believe that. And that's what I had to come to grips with. Like I believed things about God that were wrong. I used to think that just because I believed in God, that was like a universal thing. When you believe in God, it's just understood like that's just okay. So you believe in God and that's good, right? Or, I used to think very black and white when I was locked in fear. But the idea being that I used to think that because I believed in God, I believed the same thing as everyone else. You can believe in God and believe totally false things about God at the same time. And when you move into the, can't recall if it's First Peter, or yeah, I believe it's First Peter, but this idea that biblically it states, I didn't give you a spirit of fear, right? So if I'm operating from fear, like I know that's not of God. And what I have come to find about scrupulosity is it's really about learning to move from living in fear to living in trust. And learning to live from a place of trust it takes faith. That's what it is. When you're doing all these religious compulsions and you say that you have a lot of faith, but you're doing them from a place of fear, they're not done from faith. They're done from fear. And this is where, like, I had to take those jumps internally and feel through fear, release fear, because I had to realize I was the source of fear. I was the cause of my own fear. And I had projected it on to these topics or these ideas. And that's what I was trying to solve, because I wanted to make myself feel better. Looking back, if I'm honest, in everything that I did in that stage of scrupulosity, Had nothing to do with deepening my connection, practicing faith, um, learning to live and trust in God. None of it. Even though outwardly people would have said, oh, Matt's so religious, quote unquote. It had nothing to do with it. It had everything to do with I felt afraid and I wanted to mitigate my own fear. It's not that when you live from a place of trust, you don't experience fear, but you put your trust in something beyond you, something beyond your mind. And for me, I call that God. Um, and it's a completely different way of living. It's a completely different energy state. It's a completely different internal experience. And it's a completely different external experience too. You know, you're not living from this state of I need to appease and walking on eggshells and judging everything as, oh, did I do this right or wrong? Right? Like all that is from the energy of fear. When you live from a place of trust in a divine source, you live at ease, you live at peace. It's a natural byproduct of it because you trust. When I don't worry if the sun's going to come up tomorrow. I trust it is. You know? When I worry, it implies doubt, right? It implies, I mean, it doesn't even imply. It is a symptom of experiencing doubt. To confront fear, you have to confront it in your body. You have to feel it in your body. You have to understand this is where the fear really is. And it's through the releasing of that fear that you're actually able to move into states where you can experience things like love, joy, peace, harmony. And that happens internally. And from those states, then you engage in the behavior patterns that feel right with those states. And when you're dealing with scrupulosity, you really have to, like a lot of people hide behind the idea that I'm being quote unquote religious, so that they assume that doing it is good. I have this Bible study. I do this reading every day. I listen to this all the time, right? I do. And they do it from a place of fear, right? Which is so different than doing it from a place, again, of joy, of love, of peace, of harmony. And the inner shift is where everything is, in my opinion, in my experience. And again, there's going to be people that totally disagree with me, and you're going to say, well, I'm not giving up my compulsions. And if you keep saying it's because my faith is so important to me, you have to really look at yourself and say, am I operating from faith or am I operating from fear? And if you can really be honest with yourself and come to the grips that if what you're doing is really from fear and you're the source of fear, then the only obvious place to work is within yourself there, right? And that's what I've really come to believe is God is not the source of your fear. God is love. God is peace. God is harmony. Those are like the actual attributes. And fear is from you. And this is why it is an inward work and nothing external that you have to do, because the external is already that. And when it comes to scrupulosity, eliminating your compulsion so you can confront your fear is part of that journey, because that's where it is. And I just feel so strongly about that because it's what helped me liberate from that, and more importantly, have a completely different relationship with God, a much better relationship, and I think that that's available for everyone who authentically pursue it. But first you have to get honest with yourself about what state you're in, where you're operating from, and really getting yourself to that state and realizing that that is your work right there. So with that, I hope this was helpful. Again, if you're looking for help with this, happy to, this is one of the things I do with my clients. So feel free to reach out. You can put an application online. We also have resources for you over at restoredminds.com. Hey there. So if you enjoyed that video, we've linked up a few more videos that we think you'd find helpful as well. And if you have found this helpful, we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing. And if you're looking for help and guidance, please check out restoredminds.com as we have several options for you to get started. See you guys soon.